Elevated pigeon hinges is a way to make your elevated pigeon a little bit more dynamic and actually start to move through a bit of range of motion while being in an externally rotated position for your hip. So all we're going to need is an elevated surface. Now, depending on how mobile you are through your hip will determine how high this needs to be, right? The higher, the more mobile, essentially. And we'll also need a couple of tools, a weight eventually to make this more difficult and to progressively overload, but also potentially some yoga blocks as well, depending on your mobility. So let's set this up. We're going to have one bottom leg here straight or somewhat close to straight. It should be relatively comfortable. Then the top leg will be lying across the top of the box like so. Now, in terms of setup for this, I want your shin to be in the exact same straight line as the box, right? So the box and your shin, they're running parallel to one another. Then say you are in that position, but the leg is up here. All we're going to do is just get a yoga block and prop that underneath so we're supported. Here then in this supported fashion, it'll be way more comfortable to move in and out of in your hinge essentially. So now let's talk about this hinge. Say my hips are flat right now. I'm going to stick them out and let the pelvis roll forward. So my hands aren't actually moving. That's literally just the top of my hip, if you will, tilting forward or bowing or hinging, however you want to call it, yeah? And all we're going to do is allow ourselves to come forward, and then we're going to come back out of it. You can use your hands initially for support if you need, right? Wherever's comfortable, forward and back. And you'll only go as low as is manageable for you, right? Cool. From there, over time, we'll go lower and lower, like so, until we have a different yoga block. And just like any kind of mobility exercise, these increments will be probably slower than you would like and take a little bit more time. The only thing I will say though, as you're coming in and out of this movement, is that rather than arching your spine like this to come up, I want you to think about pressing this knee and this foot into the box to push yourself back up. That way, we're using our glute a little bit to actually press us back up. That way, we're actually getting stronger through length rather than just sitting here passively. If I can then press that knee and foot into the box, boom, I'm going to use my glute to posture back up. Again, building this kind of strength through length concept. Then, of course, we can always use additional load as well and do the exact same thing. Cool. One thing I will say is if you're doing this with load, you're feeling the low back, or if you're feeling the low back in general with this one, I would just be mindful of what's happening with your spine, like how much flexion and extension are you going through as opposed to movement from the hip. And it's not wrong to bend the spine, right, and flex down like this, but at the same time, if you're coming up like this and arching your back and extending, you're probably not moving from the hip as much as I'd like. So what I'd like to see in that scenario is actually just keep your ribs down, keep the back rounded, and then you can stay rounded the whole time. Okay? And that's an option there for you for if you're getting a bit of lower back discomfort, keep the spine rounded through the entire movement. And that is your elevated pigeon. Do this and watch your hip mobility increase, and your glutes and your hips, they'll just feel great. And we all want to feel great. So you should do this more.